Well, thank you so much for the tour. It was pretty cool, kind of seeing all this process. You don't really think about how much stuff kind of like goes into it, but it was really cool. Can you kind of elaborate on your personal background a little bit, like where you're from, stuff like that?
Yeah, I grew up in Washington. My brother and I grew up on the coast of Washington, and I went to Whitman College, and I graduated from there, and then I spent a year teaching English in France, and then I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, and I spent like 6 months in Seattle, not getting paid very much. But I grew up in an entrepreneurial family, so my brother and I grew up with parents who had a series of businesses over the time we were small, but one constant business for 18 years, and that was a motel. So we got to grow up answering phones in a motel and doing laundry and that sort of thing. We also worked in a kite store for a while and some other small businesses. So a very entrepreneurial family, which I think really helped with this.
Yeah. So how did you end up in Bellingham?
Very cliche, I followed a guy. I married him though, so it all worked out. My husband chose to go to Western, and we started dating, and I was kind of bumming around Seattle, and so I decided, well, I might as well move, and we got engaged, and I thought, well, I think I'll go ahead and apply for the MBA program and see about going into business. I've got a business background, and I could sure stand to learn a lot. So that's what I did, and then when the opportunity to do business with my brother came up, it seemed like a really good fit, and I have never regretted going into that MBA program. It was a fantastic program. I learned so much, and I apply the things that I learned there daily to my job.
Oh, that's good to hear. Was there anything about Mount Vernon specifically that kind of like made you want to start a business here?
Well, it's got a lot of things that are going for it in terms of a manufacturing business like this. Actually, manufacturing is the #1 industry in Skagit County. We chose Mount Vernon. We were a little bit older than your average college students. Of course, we both had grad degrees by that time, and so we wanted to start a family. And Mount Vernon's a little bit smaller than Bellingham, but we didn't want to go to Seattle where things were more expensive and busier and kind of scarier, and so that made Mount Vernon really attractive. But for a business here, it's great. We are right on the I-5 corridor, which makes shipping just a dream. I mean, FedEx is in and out of this building several times a day, and that's really helpful. It's also really nice to run a business in Washington, and I know a lot of people think that Washington isn't very business friendly. But it is really wonderful to run a business in a state that I think values people's health and safety and well-being. So some of the challenges that we face are that we pay more in Washington to our employees, not just my business, but all of the manufacturing businesses, than the ones that are in, say, Missouri or South Carolina or Michigan. And that can make it difficult when you're competing in a global environment, because we do have to price a lot of our things a lot higher. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of peace and happiness knowing that the people who work for me and the other people who work in Washington manufacturing businesses have living wage jobs and have a lot of the safety programs in place that they don't have elsewhere, which I think is too bad for those other places, but it's pretty great to live and work in a place like this that has those values, as well as, I mean, you guys are in Bellingham. You know how gorgeous it is here, right? Like,
it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Such a wonderful place to be. The food in Northwest Washington is amazing. The festivals, all of the cool things we get to go do, hiking, biking, kayaking, it's all great.
So after graduating with your master's, what was kind of the first career or job that you took up?
I did marketing and communications for the Mount Vernon Chamber of Commerce.
Oh yeah, you were talking about
And so I had a lot of experience in the kind of tourism sector. We grew up on the Long Beach Peninsula. So my mom ran the Long Beach Kite Festival for 35 years. I knew a lot about kind of merchants associations and things like that. I love people. I love helping businesses. When I was in the grad program at Western, I got the opportunity to work with the Small Business Development Center as a graduate assistant, and so I got to see a lot of businesses and learn about a lot of businesses. It was fascinating, and it was so fun to see these entrepreneurs and to help them put together a business plan or do market research, or come up with a marketing plan or help edit some of their copy for different things. It was wonderful. And going to the Mount Vernon Chamber of Commerce was a really safe move for me. I am not a really risky person. I actually had someone tell me today, like, oh, all you entrepreneurs you're so risky, and that's, they were in the administration sphere of like education. He goes, that's not what we do. We take the safe path. And I think for me, the Chamber of Commerce really was the safe path. It allowed me a place to do some really cool marketing things and to sort of get to know this area, as well as start my family in a kind of a safe environment. But it wasn't as fulfilling as starting my own business, and that's where I think that risk aversion sort of fell away a little bit when this opportunity presented itself. So what happened is my brother was moving up here, and my parents had sold their business, and they were looking to invest in us. And they knew through business channels from my mom owning or running the Kite Festival for so many years, they knew of a kite and hobby store in Seattle that wanted to sell. And they tried to convince us to go down to Seattle to run this kite store. And we said, oh my gosh, we do not want to run a retail store. We do not want to live in Seattle. This is not for us. But they had a supply side that they supplied carbon and fiberglass rods and tubes to hobbyists, as I mentioned before. And we made a deal to purchase that website and the small amount of supply. I mean, it was like 200 square feet of a tiny little room in a warehouse, right? Like, it was not a whole lot of supply. And we moved it all up here, and we just started. Okay, I guess we're doing this. We'll buy a point of sale system, and we'll figure out how to code HTML to make the website work, or, oh gosh, that's too hard. We'll hire that out, and I started managing vendor relationships, and I started managing the Google AdWords, and my brother took care of the early days of operations, and from then on out, it was just finding the next opportunity. Okay, so we have an opportunity to get this big saw and start cutting our own stuff, and creating some stronger vendor relationships, and the vendors don't want to do this custom cutting and machining, so they'll refer people to us, and that's kind of how you just grow those things. You just try. You just try. And after that, as we started to learn more about composites, we realized that we needed smarter people around us. So we hired a composites engineer, and then we hired more production personnel, and we hired, actually direct from the MBA program, we hired an inventory manager in those days. She's since moved on to Starbucks, where I believe she still works in the operations and supply chain. And we just kept going, looking up the different opportunities. A lot of it's customer driven. And so what that means is that, for instance, the entire roll wrapping department, we didn't roll wrap. We bought this building knowing that we wanted to expand, and then we had a customer come to us and say, hey, we've been having these made in China and we'd like to make them in the US. Do you think you can do this? And we put our heads together and said, well, shoot, let's give it a try, right? And so we did. And we figured it out, and a lot of it was not very technical at first. It was hand rolling, doing a lot of things by hand. And as we've gone on, we've found ways to add machines to take some of the strain off of wrists and hands. But it is, if you could see it with people in here doing these jobs, it's very people heavy. It's almost an art as much as it is an industrial act. And so it's machines and robots working kind of alongside people who are using their fingers to make sure everything's perfect.
Yeah. Kind of touching back on your early career path working for the Chamber of Commerce in Mount Vernon. So after you graduated and started on your career, was there any sort of realities that kind of hit you? It's like, wow, like I'm out of college, like this is like what I'm going to be doing potentially?
I think, well, I think that there were a lot of things that I was set up for really well, that you can learn about in a classroom setting, but that in the real life are much harder. For instance, negotiating your first salary package. That is so difficult. And it's really difficult as someone in their young, early 20s or mid 20s as I was, to know their worth. And so that was tough. That was a tough reality. I think transitioning out of that position where I had a steady paycheck and health insurance to running my own business where I needed to make tough decisions to sometimes not pay myself in order to be able to pay vendors and to get things off the ground, and having that faith that we could make this work, and that if we stuck it out long term, we'd be able to pay down the debt and we'd be able to grow out of that really rough startup phase. Like that's a pretty big gut check of, shoot, do I really want to be doing this? Being an entrepreneur is hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard in those first years, and here 15 years later, it's still hard. It's a different set of problems now. We're a profitable business, and we're in no danger of closing, save some sort of catastrophe. But I still worry about a lot of things every night. I think the other thing that is kind of a shock, and it has taken me a long time to kind of come to terms with it, is that none of us have any idea what we're doing. And so especially if you're in an organization like a Chamber of Commerce, or I currently sit on the board of the Economic Development Alliance here in Skagit County, and you meet these people, and they seem so amazing and successful. And I'm 41 years old, and I'll still shake hands with president of the local hospital and be like, "Wow, this guy!" Right? Nobody has any idea what they're doing. Yeah. They're you get the skills, and you do your best every day to take all of that knowledge that you gained, whether it's at school or through life experience, and apply it and make that next right decision, right? We're all just Dory. We're going to keep swimming. Yeah. And it kind of keeping that in mind, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. We're all making it, and we're all kind of still faking it.
There you go.
That's a wonderful piece of advice, though, and I think especially for soon-to-be grads, it does feel very intimidating when you kind of see all those people and think, okay, they know everything. Clearly, it seems like they know everything. And it is good to keep in mind that, we're all human, we don't know everything.
I think I'm at least an optimist, and I think that most people out in the world, especially when you meet them in these professional situations, they remember when they were in your shoes. They remember being college students, and they remember that intimidation. I love helping students. I love having students come to our place of business and showing people around. I go visit high schools all the time and give presentations, and I think most people genuinely want to see everybody who's coming behind them succeed. And so keeping that in mind is really, hopefully that'll help you too.
That does.
People want the best for you. I really believe that.
Yeah. Awesome. So you talked a little bit earlier about your plans kind of for Goodwinds Composites, like the operations of expanding, which is really awesome. Talking about getting another warehouse potentially developed.
Yeah.
What do you think the next steps for you in your career specifically are?
As manager of Goodwinds Composites, as managing member here?
Sure, that, and then where do you see kind of your career going? Do you have a vision of that in particular?
I don't want to change. I want to change and grow and develop, right? But I don't want to move on from this position. This is sort of our baby, and I think that our ultimate out from this business would be sort of a strategic sale in 15 or 20 years. It would be nice to not work until I'm 80. Who knows what the market's going to be like in 20 years. But there's a lot of growth that can still be happening with this business here. And I would really like to just see it to its end and then retire.
Yeah. The kind of what you touched upon earlier, how the marketing landscape and industries is constantly developing. From specifically kind of within the composite standpoint, where do you see the industry heading?
Oh, that is a big question. And what's amazing about composites is that we have this like tiny little niche with composite rods and tubes, and composites as an industry is so much more than that. There is a factory in Moses Lake that's making tow that then goes to be integrated into car body parts, and there are molders out there. People are trying to make carbon nanotubes a thing. There's so many applications, and so I mean, I guess on the big picture, I see a lot of growth. There's been growth forecasted for years and years, and I think, and that's played out other than in the pandemic. And the pandemic was tough on every industry, ours included. But now that things are sort of righting themselves, people are looking for ways to innovate. As fuel costs continue to rise, composites become more and more important because you want to save that weight. And it can be as simple as something like fiberglass rebar. If you're taking fiberglass rebar on a truck and you're getting on a ferry and you're transporting it places to do, concrete reinforcement, things like that, that is going to save you a ton of fuel vis-a-vis something like all the steel rebar that's out there, right? So there's a lot of gains that can be made. So composites as an industry is just going to keep growing. It's a great industry to get into.
Is there anything in particular that you'd like to see the marketing industry coincide with composites as it continues to grow?
Not necessarily with composites. I mean, marketing's been tough. So I work with some marketing companies because it is so complex out there. Like I mentioned a couple times, I did the Google AdWords stuff in the beginning, but that got too hard. There's so much in terms of just the programming behind that and the analysis of traffic and keywords and search terms and on and many, many things that I do not understand and don't have time to really delve into. So that fragmentation of the marketing industry has been an interesting thing to watch. And so I do contract with a company to take care of the majority of my internet marketing, and I contract with a different company to do some like SEO updates on my website and to help me to do some of the content creation that I don't have time for. And I think an interesting gap in marketing out there that is difficult, especially for someone who is running a small business, to understand is how do we get to that business customer, right? It's a business to business world for me. And the old model of you just go to trade shows and you show off your stuff, that just doesn't seem to apply anymore. People aren't going to trade shows in the same way that they used to. So what's the next thing? I'm not sure.
You'll just have to keep staying up to date and adapting.
That's the idea.
Just like you have with composites.
Yep, that's the idea.
It's very interesting. Yeah, I agree with what you said about marketing. It's become very complex, especially with digital marketing, and I do see that a lot of people now specialize in those specific things. And if you don't have time to work on search engine optimization, then you have to outsource. Yeah,
absolutely.
Is there like a specific mindset that you've kind of adopted to coincide with how the industry is constantly developing? Is there a way that you've kind of framed your mindset about that?
I have sort of, especially in the last 5 years, just adopted this mindset of constantly learning. I think I was a big learner before, and then when we had a startup and for the first 10 years of our business, you feel like you're drinking from that fire hose. Even we moved into this building 8 years ago, and it was tough. There was build out that had to happen, and it's expensive, and growth is expensive. And once we got to a period of more stability in about 2017, then my brother and I actually went back to school. And so we started taking trainings through the local Economic Development Alliance, and I did this program through Goldman Sachs called 10,000 Small Businesses that was an intensive growth management strategy. We contracted with Impact Washington, which is a manufacturing consulting group to teach us more about lean manufacturing and to help us through the ISO certification process and to do quality management and things like that. So there's so much opportunity out there to learn more, and you don't have to go very far to find it. You don't even have to spend very much money to find it. There are grants available. There are free classes available through the ED or through the chambers or through things like that. And there are other groups that form. I'm in a manufacturing CEO group where we just get together once a month and talk to each other about things we're facing. And so when you can kind of get that mindset of like, there's always more to learn. And even if I already know this stuff, I mean, I had an MBA and I went to a class that was all about like, how do you create a business plan and things like that. Stuff I've known for years and years. But to go and revisit it and to really try to kind of look at my business from the outside in was super helpful. And so, you know, I can't see that you guys would be like that, but try not to get stuck, I think, in thinking that you already know everything. And if you feel stuck in a job or a position where you're not experiencing that growth and there's not the next thing to learn, then that's time to find something that'll allow you to keep growing and learning, because that's where the fun is.
Awesome. So I just got one last question, just kind of wrap up. Do you have any advice for students that are about to graduate and enter the marketing industry?
Well, I'm not in the marketing industry, so I don't know what it might be like. But to that end, because I'm not in the marketing industry, some of my advice might be to find what you are really interested in that's maybe not marketing, right? Like you're a big bicyclist, or you love technology, or you love food. And there are a lot of companies that are like mine, or maybe a little bit bigger than mine, that can, potentially afford to hire a marketer or someone who has a marketing degree, but also has some other sort of cross-trained abilities, right? Like maybe they could do marketing and HR. There's a lot of really cool growth opportunities out there in smaller businesses that could fuel you for your whole life, and you get exposed to really wonderful people. I find that there are a lot of small businesses that pay really well because they know, just like my business, I know that anybody here could go and get a job at one of these bigger factories. And so I try to make my place really enticing. We pay well, and we've got benefits, and we've got a fun place to work, and we've got flex time, and we've got leave if you need it. And you can find all of those things in smaller companies. You don't have to say, okay, I've got a marketing degree, now I guess I'm going to go and work for a big marketing company and then sit at a desk and do Zoom meetings all day long to help somebody with their weird digital marketing strategy. Unless that's something you love, in which case, good on you, and that's fantastic. I need people like that. But if that's not what you're looking for, there are companies out there like mine and a little bit bigger than mine that need someone to manage their marketing, and would be happy to have somebody young, fresh out of college doing that.
That's excellent advice. I feel like you've had a lot of really insightful advice just throughout this conversation. And I love what you said too about just continuing to learn. I think that is where people get stuck, when they stop continuing to learn and assume they know everything about industries that are always changing. I think that's wonderful. So just to wrap up our conversation, I know you're not in marketing, but how would you define marketing?
How would I define marketing? Oh boy.
I know.
I'm not sure I could.
One.
I haven't been in school for a really long time, okay? I don't have to do that usually. How would I define marketing? Boy, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer.
Take a stab in the dark. There's no wrong answer.
There's no wrong answer.
No
well,
wrong answer.
I bet Dan Purdy would say there are some wrong answers.
Shout out, Dan.
That's a good point.
Man, marketing. Finding people to sell to. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's certainly what it is for me.
I was about to say, I think it's interesting that that's how you defined it, because that is what marketing is for you. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Thank you so much, Amelia and Goodwinds Composites, for letting us host our podcast here today. We've had a great time getting to know you and what you do here and all about composites, which certainly I had no knowledge of. If you want to follow Amelia and Goodwinds Composites, we'll link their socials in the description below.
Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast today. You can follow Marketing by the Minute on all of our socials, which we'll have linked in the description below. We'd also like to thank our special team behind the camera, our producers Sara, Slone, and Karlie Kildall, editor and sound tech Arnav SenGupta, our product manager Jace Gersten, and special thanks to our instructor Dan Purdy.
We're your hosts, Talia Aukema-Gray
and Steinar Mikkelson.
Talk to you next time on Marketing by the Minute on the Scene. Is that it?
Yay!